Hello. Hello and welcome everyone. We're so glad you're here at Black Women Leaders in Philanthropy. I am excited for today's conversation and that you decided to join us. My name is Julita Bailey Vasco, and I currently lead communications at the Nellie Mae Education Foundation. Before we begin, there are a couple of notes. Live captions are available to turn on at the bottom of your screen. The chat function will be turned off for today's event, but if you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the Q&A section, and we'll be sure to address as many questions as we can towards the end of this very important and on-fire conversation. This event will be supported with ASL interpretation by Cheyenne Atkins Grant from Joyful Signing. Cheyenne, we're so happy that you're here. And this event will also be facilitated by Dr. Ghislaine N. Ngunu, Nellie Mae's interim president and CEO. Ghislaine has worked at multiple levels of the education sector, including nonprofits, schools, and school districts. She has been a teacher, has designed and led programs to support school district leaders. She has provided leadership coaching around issues of equity and social justice. These days, Ghislaine spends her time rethinking the role of education, philanthropy, and foundations at large in our continued fight for racial justice, reimagining public education, and liberation. Ghislaine is currently learning how to rest and cultivate unapologetic joy. We're so excited that you're here. And again, we just want to say thank you. I will now hand things off to Ghislaine.
Thank you so much, Julita. Thank you, thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Dr. Ghislaine Ngunu. I'm the interim CEO and president here at the Nellie Mae Education Foundation, where we are committed to championing efforts to prioritize community goals that challenge racial inequities and strive to advance a just and excellent public education ecosystem for all of New England youth and for our nation's young people at large. Today's conversation is such a timely one because I'm in the company of my sisters. Because of the critical and intersectional lens that Black women bring to how they navigate the world and the understanding of what it takes to manifest a society in which we all flourish, I am inspired by the rising number of Black women leaders across sectors and particularly in philanthropy. It is also true that we are seeing several Black women leave executive roles to pursue their own ventures or other better aligned opportunities. In the past, at Nellie Mae, we've made space to talk about #PhilanthropySoWhite and explore the journey of confronting whiteness, injustices, inequities in philanthropy from the perspectives of white leaders. And we've thought, that was all good and insightful, and we are ready to flip the script, to change the tune by centering the voices, the leadership, the experiences, and the liberation dreams of Black women who occupy senior leadership roles in philanthropy. We are living in times when societal conditions are so precarious, democracy is relentlessly threatened, and many facets of our institutions, including public education, that govern us and support our daily lives are under attack. I and many others can't help but reflect on where Black women in the sector find themselves in their leadership and the work towards equity, justice, and social transformation inside and outside of our institutions. There are so many stories to tell, so many lessons to glean from how Black women navigate the workings of a sector that perpetuates white dominant ideologies and practices, even with good intentions. We believe that centering and supporting the leadership and the experiences of Black women in philanthropy provides wisdom and guidance to solutions that can serve us all. These are just some of the topics and questions that we are going to explore today in the very short time that we have together with our incredible panelists, Morgan Dawson, Dr. Charmaine Mercer, and Dr. Teresa Younger. So please, ladies, come to the screen. I have bios to speak to each of those women, and we don't have enough time to do justice to their bios. So I'm going to keep them really, really short. And I'm going to start with Dr. Charmaine Mercer, who is the Chief of Equity and Culture at the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, where she helps identify, shape, and promote practices, programming, and grant making, which deepen diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging while advancing racial justice. She also helps drive the foundation's 150 million racial justice grant making fund. Welcome, and thank you for saying yes to this conversation. Next, I am going to introduce Morgan Dawson, who is from Southern California. I'm sure we have colleagues and friends and siblings from California in the house. Morgan is the co-CEO at Threshold Philanthropy, and she's guided by her lived experience. She wants to change the experience for other Black women as well as her own. Morgan strives to make space for the people that this country continuously fail. Her goal is not simply to make philanthropy better, but to create communities that are welcoming and fruitful for everyone. She is rewriting the script, and we're here for it. Thank you for being here, Morgan. And Dr. Teresa Younger is an activist, an advocate, a renowned public speaker, an organizational strategist, and a proven leader in the philanthropic and policy sectors. She spent over 20 years on the front lines of some of the most critical battles for comprehensive equity and the elimination of institutionalized oppression. She now serves as the president and CEO of the Mies Foundation for Women. Thank you for being here. Oh my goodness, I am just so excited. And time is gonna go by super, super fast. So I'm gonna just dive right in. And the first question I'm gonna put on the table for us is, we know that there are so many different types of philanthropy out there, right? We are not a monolith. The sector itself is not a monolith. So can you begin by sharing with us the kind of philanthropic organization that you move and lead in? And then I'm going to add a second part. How, as a Black woman, you experience your own power within this philanthropic institution that you're a part of and that you lead within. So just, let's see, who's going to get us started? All right, Teresa, you are unmuted, so let's start with you.
Oh, man. Okay. Well, first off, it is such an honor and a privilege to be sitting here with everybody. And I will be quite honest, I am sitting in my car if people are wondering where I am, and the sun is setting, so it may get a little dark here. You do not ask a 75-year-old woman what her Wi-Fi password is, i.e. my aunt, because we can't find it. So my car is a spot where I'm in this conversation. And I tell that only because we are all living very real lives with very real responsibilities. Absolutely. That we have. And we still, you know, I wanted to be here for this conversation because I have such admiration and respect for my colleagues on this call today. So as you mentioned, which I love, is what is philanthropy from my perspective, because there are different kinds of philanthropy out there. I run a public women's foundation, and that means that we are a 501c3, and we raise every dollar that we give away. We have a small endowment that we raise money for, and then we draw down the 5% off of that. But it's very different than other foundations, because we draw down about $1 million from our endowment, and we raise anywhere from $10 to $16 million to move those dollars to the field to support grassroots movement building led by women and girls of color as a point of inclusion. And we sit at the intersection of philanthropy and the nonprofit, and we fund at the intersection of gender and race. Our offices are based in New York, in Brooklyn, New York. Yay. However, we fund across the country, predominantly women and girls of color. So we believe that our mission is to build women's collective power in the United States. So we believe in everybody participating in how we move our dollars. So we raise the dollars and then we move those dollars to the field in a variety of different ways. And we've been trying to break philanthropy from funding in silos and start funding from trust and funding the wholeness of the work that's being done in the field. I can go on and on and on, but I think that gives a little bit of a feel. So the difference of our foundation is that we're the oldest public women's foundation in the country, maybe in the world even. We're almost 50 years old. And we raise the money that we move to the field, and we have an endowment that we draw down on. The other money in the endowment, we emphasize and make sure that it is invested towards supporting the intersection of gender and race. So I'll stop there because I know my colleagues have some really interesting pieces too.
No, thank you. That's so amazing, right? And I think you just spoke to how you leverage the fullness of a foundation's asset towards mission and purpose, not just the portion that you draw down on. So thank you for taking us there. Can you speak maybe a little briefly to the second part of the question, which was how are you manifesting and navigating your own power? How are you experiencing power within your role and within this institution that you lead?
Yeah, the Miss Foundation is a traditional second wave institution until about 8 or 9 years ago. In which case I came on board as the CEO, and I'm now the longest serving CEO of color and the second longest serving CEO in Ms. history. And so one of the things that I have shown up is to show up as my real self. I wear my hair natural. 80% of the staff are women of color. The entire leadership team are women of color, and 70% of our board are women of color. This is an intention by which I've stepped into this role. And it was 5 years ago in our strategic plan that we were bold, unapologetic, and intentional about centering this work around women and girls of color, because they are the movement leaders in this country. And so that's kind of how I show up. I'm a 5'9" Black woman with indigenous roots. And so when I show up in space, I come as my fullest self and don't give anybody an opportunity to relax from those roles.
That is so amazing and inspiring. And I have so many follow-ups, but I'm going to wait. Thank you for kicking us off. Morgan, you want to jump in here? Tell us about your type of philanthropy and who you are within it and what your power looks like.
So Threshold Philanthropy returns resources through holistic community care to Black and Indigenous women, Two-Spirit, LGBTQIA queer folks in Washington and the Carolinas. We call ourselves a chosen family foundation. I have an LLC and a 501c3, and our founding funder, we only have one funder. We don't have a board. So our entire staff and of 5 Black and Indigenous women and our founding funder, who's a white woman, we all make grant decisions together. I think our philanthropy is very interesting because our founding funder co-created this foundation with us. So our goal, and a lot of family foundations, which honestly, I didn't know a lot about before I started this job. And honestly, a lot of people don't know a lot about family foundations because it's purposely secretful. But our founding funder didn't come to the table with, hey, I care about education. I was a former teacher. Let's do education. Or, I care about animals and this is my intent. Her intent was Black liberation. Her intent was to end white supremacy. And that's how we move through the world. We started off thinking about reparations, and then we decided that reparations is something that governments owe people. And what we do is return resources. We fund in Washington and the Carolinas because that's where her family has committed harms. She's from North Carolina, and her family's also from South Carolina. And then they made their money in Washington. I think the power question is really interesting because even with all that intention that our foundation was started with, it is still run by 2 Black women. And when we go into spaces with all of the access and all of the power sharing that our founding father wants to do, they still look to her. And so we'll be in a meeting with an investment person, and they'll be like, well, what do you want to do? X, Y, and Z. And she says, well, Morgan just said she wanted to do this. So why are you asking me? We're obviously going to go. So it's interesting because as a fat Black queer woman who turned 30 this year, I'm still the youngest person in the room. They're still not sure if they should be listening to me. And we've picked our vendors very intentionally of, I'm not going to pay the person who's going to ignore me in the room to handle our money. That is a choice that I get to make. And across the board, all of our vendors are somewhere in. If Teresa said, hey, Morgan, do you know so-and-so? I could call up them and give them your number, and they would treat you like they treated me. And that was very important because we think about returning resources in every aspect of our work, not just in our grant making. So our entire operating budget, we specifically play Black and Indigenous vendors more. So that if they need anything, they won't have to take extra work. So all of our vendors are Black, Indigenous, women of color, small local owned businesses. And again, this was our choice. We want every dollar to be activated. And we feel like every dollar is a returning of resources. And we've told all those vendors, if you want to expand your business, come to us first. Because part of our goal is building generational wealth for Black and Indigenous people. And we specifically started with Black and Indigenous people because when we thought about the root of harm in our country, we thought it starts with Native genocide and then the enslavement of Black people. And that is the harm that we are trying to correct. We fund collective healing, individual healing, capacity building, and agency building. And we specifically define capacity as the container for collective care. And now I've talked too much, so I want to make sure that I'm giving everyone else space. I'm also really, really excited to be here.
And you have not talked too much, Morgan. Thank you. That is just so beautiful and profound. And I'm taking copious notes here, and we shall return to some of the things that you just named. Thank you. Charmaine.
Alrighty, thank you. This is an exciting group. I was like, how can I pay attention and take notes at the same time? Morgan and Teresa, oh my goodness, okay. Oh wow, this is a good group, an amazing group to be a part of. So the Hewlett Foundation, I'll try to give the comparable context for the organization in which I work with. We are a private family foundation. We fund internationally and nationally with a greater concentration, probably on national in terms of what people know us around programming, but we do have a meaningful international component in our environment as well as our gender equity and governance work. We have 8 separate programs that sit underneath the foundation that we fund through. We do have a board. It has some family members on it, but they're not the majority of the board. They are only involved in decisions in terms of the approval of our budget. They don't actually get into the approval of grants. The foundation has about $14 billion in assets. Our grant making is approximately $516 million or so that we do across those 8 programs. That's about 2,200 grants or so every year that we do. We have about 120 to about 130 staff, depending on which day, week we're in, is the number of folks that we have there. The Hewlett Foundation has done a lot of its work to begin to think about diversity, equity, and advance towards racial justice more recently under the leadership of its current president, Larry Kramer. So about 10 years ago, the foundation staff was in a different direction. So the data that I'll give you, I want to do kind of comparative just to kind of show our growth. But at about 10 years ago, the foundation staff was approximately 87% white. And now it is currently 47% people of color. And the board, the senior leadership team was approximately the same, about 85% or so white at the time. And now it's 60% people of color. in terms of the context in which we work and under the leadership. And that has been notable to the work that I lead, is working with him, but also alongside the other members of the senior team, of which there's 16 of us in total. So that's kind of the context of the foundation's structure. And just for another bit of context, I was a program officer on the education team and then moved into this role in 2021. So I like to think about how I've experienced my power, and growing into that is something that I've been learning. It's a process, certainly not an event. And it's looked differently under different leaders. I came into the foundation. I'm new to philanthropy. Hewlett's the only foundation I've ever worked for and with, so I didn't have much context. Also, I should note we have term limits. So every 8 years, you go. It's not about how well you perform either. So every 8 years that just happens. And so when I first came to the foundation, I was recruited to come to the foundation by a director who was a Black man who I had previously worked with he was a board member at another nonprofit that I worked with. So the way our organization used to work, coming to work with him was like, yeah, that's a no-brainer. And it was easy for me to lead with a Black man in my leadership role with a much smaller team, but moving into this role with 120 people, and the foundation's president is obviously not a Black man, has been a process for me to learn how to lead. And so when I thought about the question, so thank you, Ghislaine, for giving me an opportunity to reflect on it. I thought about it from a couple of different buckets. I would say that I lead joyfully, comfortably in my Blackness. Like, I am so happy, and it's my hair, it's my clothes, it's the voice, it's all of that. It's the way I speak. It's me being me, and I do it joyfully. I'm always smiling because I get to be me every day. And that feels so amazing, and it feels so great. I also prioritize my own wellness, and I'm encouraged to do so. It's not just me selfishly feeling like I'm rebelling against the norm. Prioritizing my wellness has been something that's important. It's deepened over the years, but even when I first arrived at the foundation in 2017, and that's ranged from, having a coach. I have an amazing coach, as many of you know, who know her. I also focus on my own, what I would say is my infrastructure for learning what I need and being able to lead in the ways that are most comfortable for me when I'm, kind of being at my best. And then just, again, my overall wellness. And then I would end with that part by saying, also just narrating it and sharing it with other people, right? Saying I'm purposeful in that part of saying hey, this is what I do. Focusing on me is something that's important, because I also think it's important to kind of spread it and normalize it, so that it's not just my joy and my own way of leading. So now I'm going to stop.
Thank you. That is so beautiful. Just made me think about Audre Lorde's self-care, and resting is self-preservation, right? And I have a former coach who used to say, you must do this work as if you're running the race of 100 years. So care and pace are really important. Thank you. Okay, you've all touched on so much in the last few minutes, right? And I'm hoping that, our people who are gathered here in community are able to hear the differences between a 501c3 and a family foundation, right? And you can have a philanthropy that has an LLC and a 501c3, and this notion of endowments that many of us have. And you might be working in a place like Morgan, where they're no, this work is about returning all of the resources to the people, right? And I so appreciate that so much. And I've personally also been reflecting on the role of governance in this work and my own relationship to governance as a Black woman in philanthropy, right? And you've each spoken to, from having no board to having a board that approves the budget and the strategy, but not the grants. So I really appreciate all of that. Now, one thing that I think I heard as a through line is how your organizations also have diversified over the years. Teresa, from your intention to really prioritizing the hiring of women of color. Morgan, to your, we are unapologetic about Black and Indigenous people and businesses. Charmaine, to the history of Hewlett, right? That used to be, I think you said 87% white. And in my experience, right, I've heard things like, wait, what does this mean for white people, right? Like, is this like reverse discrimination? Why is this so important, right? Like, white people also can do equity and justice and liberation work. Can you speak, this is my second question, to, given the socio-political context that we exist in, why it's been so important for that journey and that shift to happen in philanthropy and in your institutions, and the roles that Black women are uniquely positioned to engender these shifts, these changes, i.e. diversity, equity, and inclusion, including in who gets to lead and make decisions in philanthropy. What roles are Black women uniquely positioned to hold in these times? Let's start with Morgan this time.
Yeah, I mean, I would say all of them because we've been doing the work already. So the thing is, half of philanthropy is taking credit for what Black women have been doing for a long time. And I think, especially when we're talking about equity and inclusion, when I think about where philanthropy is or where it got to in 2020, and it shifted from pretty quickly in 2021, we have to take into account that there were program officers, Black women fighting so that when people, I remember in the middle of 2020, when everyone decided they were going to care about Black people, that there were so many program officers that I knew who were like, okay, let's move this money while they care. Let me burn myself out and move all of this money before the tide shifts. People were working around the clock. And the actuality is, when we talk about philanthropy, it is, I mean, when we talk about everything, we're talking about something that was built on the backs of us. And so when we talk about, we're getting the credit for the work we've already been doing, but honestly, what it really, for me, what it really is is philanthropy prepared for us to lead? Right? Like, are we prepared for Black women to be unapologetically themselves? Have we resourced the women of color that we threw into leadership positions? Are they resourced, or are we just expecting them to fix things that white people made mistakes about? And when we talk about trust-based philanthropy or community care, as I say it, even these amazing concepts, PIA and trust-based philanthropy, people are using that using it as a checklist. That's not what Pia wanted. She didn't want you to go, okay, I did this, I did this, I did this. No, we're trying to teach you these concepts. We're basically trying to teach people how to care for each other the way we have in our communities. Because I will say, I wasn't raised in philanthropy. I was raised by a mother who, if anyone needed anything, we gave. So I assumed that's what everyone else did. I assumed that when you had excess, you give, because that's what I saw in my Black and brown communities.
Yes.
And then when I started philanthropy, I was like, what is this thing that white people are doing that is not what they say it is? This is not actually the words you say, and the actions don't match up, because if you wanted to end houselessness, you could. Like, why are we asking for reports and for a food bank? And we're, like, just give them the food. It wasn't making sense to me. So I think the position we're uniquely held is we do see people as whole. And I don't know that others do. And so most Black women I know can walk into a room and tell you who's not there and say, oh, did you consider including so-and-so? Because she's not here. And we're talking about this. We're talking about farm workers, but I don't see any farm workers in the room. And I've been in many rooms where Black women are the person who says that, and they're often told to not to. They're told to be quiet. And then some scandal will happen and someone will be like, well, think we should have listened to Sherry? Probably.
Yes. Yes, Morgan. Thank you for speaking it. I'm like, come on, preach. Tell all the truth and nothing but the truth. That question that you ask, is philanthropy prepared for Black women to lead and to lead as ourselves and unapologetically? How do you answer that, Morgan? You just offered the question, right, on a plate. Like, do you have an answer to it?
I was hoping Teresa would answer it. I mean, I don't.
I mean, we're gonna bring Teresa into it also.
I mean, I don't think so, actually. I don't think
Yeah.
so. I think we are asking for something we're not ready and prepared to handle. The
Mhm.
amount of, we gave a series of leadership grants when we first started. Threshold's only 2 years old, because so many women of color and Black women were coming to us saying they were hired for a position and their board was like, well, I'm not going to give my annual gift. Let me see how you do. You hired her. Why would you not set her up? Or, you know, I've been through hiring processes where people are not asking the Black woman in the room, how would I support this Black woman in this white institution when you've been the only Black employee? And so it's like, no, we are not prepared. But you know who is prepared for Black women to lead? Other Black women. Philanthropy might not be prepared, but Black women are ready to say, what do you need? Hey, I heard you got this position. Let me know if you need anything. I know they're crazy over there. And I might not tolerate them, but I'm not going to let you fail. And so philanthropy might not be prepared, but Black women aren't going to let each other fail.
No, thank you. And that speaks to the power of community care that you all were referencing also, and to the intersectional lens that we hold because of the intersectional identities that we hold, right? Like, hence why we're able to pinpoint who is not in the room. I hope my board chair is on the call, because he and I often have this conversation. He's like, okay, who else do you need me to go talk to? I'm like, I can't help but see the work and the world this way, right? So we need everyone. Thank you. Charmaine, Teresa, would you like to jump in? Either with the initial question of like, what roles are Black women uniquely positioned to do? Or is philanthropy prepared for Black women to lead? Because Morgan just put you all out there like that.
Well, I think in some ways I'm the OG on the call. I'm 53 years old, and I entered philanthropy in 2014.
You are the OG. You're the OG.
Before you said women and girls of color without everybody walking out of the room. Like now you can say women and girls of color. The fact that you are having this call today shows how far we have come in philanthropy in 8.5 years. But is philanthropy prepared for Black women's leadership? Absolutely not. And you know, Morgan hit it on the head. Had it not been for program officers at foundations when I started, I would not be here today, nor would the Ms. Foundation be successful. It was those program officers who said, I won't let you fail. This doesn't really fit in our portfolio. Wait, what are you trying to do? Like, you know, in the pool of inequality, we're all in there. And what I was saying is, I only want to drop my pebble over women and girls of color. That's the only place I want to drop my pebble. I cannot drop it on everything else. I don't have those kinds of resources. And there were a lot of folks when I started. I mean, 2014, think about this, because this is, you know, we sometimes lose track of time. 2014, we had our first Black president, and everybody thought we had entered into an anti-racial, you know, world, and that all was going well in the world. At the time, there were, like, I could count on one hand the number of Black women leaders nationally, and on a couple of fingers the number of Black women leaders leading national foundations in this country. And that has bloomed and folded. And Morgan's 100% right. We will not let each other fail. And so we show up in space, we invite each other into space. And the one thing I would say is, you know, that our lived experiences is what drives our work. I mean, we are coming into this because of the lived experiences we have had in the communities that we have been in, and that drives how we see this work. I had no idea what I was going to do in philanthropy when I got into this role, but centering women and girls of color was an intentional action as a point of inclusion, so that white women were not like, oh my God, where are we? We were just saying, we're reprioritizing the conversation. You may be in it. We are going to center ourselves in the conversation. We're going to be really intentional about that. And our lived experiences will inform it. And what we heard, I did a listening tour my first few years here at the Ms. Foundation. I'm doing another one starting in February. But one of the things that I heard was philanthropy keeps wanting us to divide ourselves into health, safety, economic justice, reproductive justice, environmental justice. Philanthropy wants us to like then answer the questions that they ask us to those degrees. And so one of the things that we did at the Ms. Foundation, I was like, wait, I had run nonprofits, right? I can't divide my youth development work different from my voter registration work and different from my direct service work. I can't. And so one of the things that we did at the Ms. Foundation, we de-siloed our entire strategy. We fund in the South, we fund girls of color, we fund birth justice, we fund Indigenous women's reproductive rights, we fund building connections and deepening relationships. So we took out those silos and said, now tell us how you do what you do in your community from a very broad context. And that comes from my lived experiences of having been an ED of a nonprofit, where I was like, I can't do that. And, you know, like I said at the beginning, we raise our money. All our funders want us to report in the structures that they have. And so we're also pushing back and saying, hey, we don't ask our partners in the field to tell us what they're doing just in X or Y. So I can't report it to you that way, because that's actually not an effective way. We can't tell you the success you've had because you've only funded us for 1 year, and we have generational work to do to have an impact that we're striving to make. So, you know, we sit at this, you know, I said we sit at this crux. We're pushing against philanthropy to make change happen and reconstructing for our sisters and brothers and siblings in the nonprofit sector for how they can develop a relationship with us. And we give only general operating dollars. We say, pay yourself and turn the lights on and pay somebody else. And in fact, give yourself some freaking benefits, because many of these nonprofits out there that are asking philanthropy to fund them do not rest, cannot retire, do not have health insurance. You know, there's a whole bunch going on there. And so, you know, philanthropy's got to stop looking for the bright and shiny, sparkly person, because they want Black people to dance. They want Black women to dance for them and give them the rah-rah. And at the end of the day, we want to do the right work and change the world. And we need to push back against oppression that has been holding us for years. And yet we still do this work with love and joy, you know, and we've got to do that into the future. Okay, I'll stop talking now. Morgan just talked so much. I was like, oh yeah, no. As the OG, I'm telling you, it is so different today to see all of you women on these calls, and you are nowhere in the room when I started. And that fills me with great joy and pleasure and happiness that we are moving this and we're having really bold conversations that we could have never had by ourselves before.
Absolutely. And telling the truth, right? And not hiding in a room to have these bold and truthful conversations. I'm holding on to, and we still do this work with love and joy. No, thank you, Teresa. To de-siloing, that's something that I think about a lot, especially in the world of education. Like my sister Charmaine will know, right? Like we do education. And in the times we live in, I'm like, you know, again, Audrey, people don't live single issues lives. Like you can't take care of public education and ignore all of the other isms, right? And all of the other things we must work on and fight for. So thank you for raising that call to action for us to think about issues and solutions holistically. And you just had me thinking, right? Like, when Black people are free, when Indigenous people are free and flourish, we can all flourish. Because I'm often asked, like, why do you center students of color or communities of color or, BIPOC, whatever people call them? I'm like, because if we can figure out how to like have flourishing, it'll serve and help all of us. Is often what I say here. Charmaine, you've been smiling. I know you have so much to share here. What roles do we uniquely play? And is philanthropy prepared for Black women to lead? Which we're going to lead anyway, right?
Right. I definitely think, one, I was smiling because Morgan and Teresa was like, yep, yep, you're so right. I will start with Black women not letting Black women fail. When I got in this position, like every, I don't know, other day, I was getting phone calls from people who I didn't know, through people who I did, just saying like, I just want to let you know, sister, congratulations, like this is that, but we need you to know we are here for you. Just so the instant love from people who I had never, and still because we're in the COVID world, I've never touched. Like I still feel that and know that. Teresa, people like you who've been there before, Morgan and I who did the work, like when I find out, because again, I'm still new, very new to philanthropy. I came in 2017 and I came in under some pretty favorable conditions. And when I got in, I was like, wait, what? They was doing what? Like, oh my God, like this is crazy. Like, Morgan was like, they wasn't doing what they were saying they was doing. They was doing a whole bunch of other stuff too. But I was able to kind of burrow myself in my way in a way that just, was protected from a lot of that. So I think definitely I want to like +1 to Black women making sure that we don't fail. With appropriate support, and I emphasize the appropriate support. I believe Black women can do anything, right? And I definitely think that Black women in particular are well positioned to deal with anything that involves complexity, that involves challenge, that requires compassion and consideration. Like, because that's who we are. And when I was listening to Teresa and Morgan, I was like, yep, that's what my mama taught me too. Like, there's something, that's how we know who's not in the room. Like, so whenever we think about that from an organizational change effort, even if you didn't call it racial justice, whatever it is, just because humans are humans, you always want to have compassion. Just because it's important to bring people along, you kind of want to recognize who's not there and then think about what they might need just to be present. That's where the consideration. And because complexity and challenge is what the world constantly places upon us. That's all we know. It literally is all we know. It's like the air we breathe is complexity and challenge. That's why we look at other people like, why are you tripping? When they're like saying how hard things, because all we know is complexity and challenge. And trying to change an organization as the world around us is changing, and trying to get people to understand that they don't have all the answers, even though the world has always told them that they have all the answers, trying to fight against that. And when you throw in money, like that's all complexity and challenge. It's like, yeah, so support Black women and they'll help you with all of that. Most philanthropies though are not there. They are so not there because I still see the tears. I still hear the tears, and it saddens me. Because this work, if it truly is supposed to be about charity and compassion and it's like, why are folks crying? We should all be doing this with joy. It's like you have a lot, which should make you happy. You're able to give it to people and hopefully bring some form. We should all be happy in this scenario, but we are all not happy in this scenario. So it's like there's something going on, and how do we change that? And so there's different questions. Someone put in the chat box, what are the questions that we should be asking as we're thinking about going in philanthropy? And I'll say, like, look past the money. That's the first question. Tell yourself, no matter how much money they're offering you, that's not why you're there. That's not why you're there. So think about, so I would just say overwhelmingly philanthropy is not ready, because it does require a lot of people with the true willingness to be different. And yes, the leadership matters. Yes, you want the president and the vice, if those are the people, but it's also the people. It's the people that fuel it are the ones who have changed the culture. I keep telling people, be the change you seek. And when you look across our 10-year history, it's been the people. As the people have changed, that's where the policies have changed. So going back to pushing out white people, we've never pushed out white people. We welcome everybody. I think that by welcoming everybody, the organization itself is just a better place, because we're trying to make it work for everyone. And that to me is the true definition of justice. I often say, I wish we didn't have to say racial justice. Unfortunately, we're in America, so we do, because it's justice for everybody. No matter what your status is, I want you to be able to be whole. And that's, how do we get to that? How do we get to some form of justice for all? I'll stop there.
Whew. I want to stop asking questions and just listen to all of you. And Charmaine, you lifted up the question in the chat, right? So my next question to you, which I will add or bring back that question from the chat, is what is something you wish you had known when you first started in philanthropy? What is something you wish you had known? And Pamela, thank you for joining us today, Pamela, did ask in the chat, what are some of the questions that one must ask, themselves as they enter or early in the philanthropic career journey, in order to navigate this well, if that's a word? What's one thing you wish you'd known, and what are some of the things you must ask yourself?
So I'm a true kind of icon for ignorance is bliss, because I straight off the streets to Hewlett. So, I don't know. I didn't have any, I didn't have any questions. I literally didn't have, I didn't have any questions kind of coming in. And then when I got here and began to understand and think about it, I think I used my space to ask different questions. And what I have found is that a lot of instances, these questions haven't been asked. So much of the work that we're doing right now at the foundation is about really trying to center an understanding of racial justice and what it means, and then supporting people and applying that to what they do. So not just to your grant making, because yes, we care about the grant making and we have a lot of, but we also give out money. We also hire people. We also contract with people. So how do we build that understanding so that you're able to deepen that and then apply it to what you do? So that's so much a part of our work. So I think that's the part where, we could spend some, but as a part of the work, really deepen that to change.
Yeah. So once you entered and you started asking those questions that hadn't been asked before, can you give us an example of what one of those questions may have been? Or two?
Well, and at the very beginning, though, it was interesting. I asked some of the people who were grantees of Hewlett what was important to them. So if there were 5 things that you could always ask me to do as a program officer, what would they be? And conversely, there were 5 things that you hope that I would never do. Like, what would they be? Because I was brand new. I didn't know what to expect. I mean, I knew the people here at Hewlett and what they would say, but there were people who were in the nonprofit space, that was the space that I came from. So that was a space that I knew. But there were folks who worked in the nonprofit space. And since I know she's on, I'm going to say her name, Elena Silva, Dr. Elena Silva, who would be honest with me. And they would tell me, like, yeah, no, you should think about this. And so I asked those people as I was coming in, what are some of the things that I should do if I want to be kind of understood in this way? And then conversely, what are the, and I took their advice. So that could include being in partnership. Like, I don't need you just to come to my meeting. I need you to be a partner, which might include coming to my meeting, but how do we have that conversation to make sure that I'm actually being a partner to you? So that would be an example.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think Charlemagne hit it on the head, by the way. There's 2 things that I think ignorance is bliss. I mean, the less I knew, the better I was. But I also went in because I made a very conscious choice that I wanted to be close to those doing the work in the field and have the influence that I could have on a broader stage. But that meant I needed to be in deep relationship with people. And so when I came in, I remember a grantee partner coming to my office and all dressed up and with her folder full of, all the information she was going to sell for me about how great her organization was. And she sat down and she started giving me the dance, right, that I had done 100 times for funders, right, when I was a nonprofit head. And so I said, before you tell me any of this, I know your organization's great, but tell me who you are. Tell me why you do this work. Explain that to me. Educate me on who you are and why you do this. And then how can we be in relationship with each other, not a transaction with each other? And that was really key. There's two things I would suggest to people, nonetheless, if they're looking to go into philanthropy. Get good with your comfort with money. Get good with it yourself, because it is.
What do you mean by that?
I think that there are oftentimes Black and brown folks who don't have a good relationship with money. And, one of the things I remind people is it is our lived experiences that informs us. During COVID, in a family of 6 siblings, I was the only one with a salaried job. So what did that mean during COVID? It meant I had an income coming in, but my hourly siblings did not, and I needed to help them. Get comfortable with money, because philanthropy is going to give you a different kind of security. And you have to get comfortable with your own money, giving it away, how that money was developed and secured. It's not money. Philanthropy is not designed because money was clean and made everybody feel warm and fuzzy. Philanthropy was designed as a tax break, and it was created on the backs of many who did not have a choice on whether they participated in the man getting more money or not. And so, get comfortable with the role that you are playing, and go in with a pace, space, and grace to educate and not take on the responsibility to educate everybody. Yes. Educate yourself, but you are not responsible for educating the entire foundation that you are going in with. And give grace for people to move. Their lived experiences are different than yours, and you have to allow them to move through it. And when they mess up, call a mistake, and figure out how to keep moving forward. Even the most socially just, righteous philanthropies are not, we're not going to all be perfect, because we only know what we know. And so give grace where you can. That's what those would be the things I would say. Go ahead, Morgan. I see you.
You are so right, because when I think about this question, my thing is, if you're educating someone, you should be paid accordingly, right? So a lot of white philanthropy want people to be a program officer and a DEI agent. And honestly, if you're $1 billion foundation, you can pay me for 2 jobs and stop pretending like, foundations are all poor when it comes to their employees, and that should not be the case. Secondly, I think one of the questions we should ask is who's being centered, right? And I think Charmaine is absolutely right. If I don't know the answer to the question, I negotiated, this is my second job in philanthropy. My first job, my boss was our founding funder. I negotiated my salary with her for a year. All right. Again, people grow. I don't know why I stayed, but at one point in the middle of that process, I was complaining to my mother, and she said, maybe you're just the low man on the totem pole. And I was like, maybe you're right. What is our org structure? Yeah. And she said, it's a circle. Well, if it's a freaking circle, then I shouldn't be paid less than everyone else, right? Ask the question. First of all, stop saying safe space. Don't work anywhere where they say it's a safe space, because what they mean is it's a safe space for white people to say the dumb thing. What you should be working at is what I like to say is a brave space. Yes, white person say the dumb thing, and then I can say why it's dumb. The reality is that this work takes vulnerability, but the way it's currently built is white people are asking people of color to give and give and give, and people of color are not comfortable saying, hey, this is what I need. So if you're going to go into philanthropy, 1, are you prepared to give? 2, let's take benevolence off the table. Because it is a tax shelter. No one is being benevolent. And before it was a tax shelter, it was something so white women could socially climb. Watch The Gilded Age. It's a beautiful HBO show, but it's the first thing I actually saw where people were talking about philanthropy as social currency. And no one else is talking about it like yes. We all pretend it was benevolence, and it wasn't. Secondly, I ask questions like, hey, if we're supposed to be centering community, then why are we saying that this white woman's feelings are more important than the fact that we're at a Native org and she said Indian giver. We shouldn't be consoling this white woman. We should be trying to fix our relationship with this Native community that we just harmed, right? Like, again, sometimes someone saying the dumb thing, everyone else, the other white people in there are thinking it. They just know it's a dumb thing to say. I've been in boardrooms where I went back and forth with board members. And at one point I said, hey, she's always going to say a stupid thing. She has for the last 4 years. Why am I still the only person saying it's a dumb thing? Right? So before you accept the role, the question is like, okay, I'm willing to do this work. Are you actually willing to do this work with me? Or is this a place where I'm supposed, and people might not want to know the question, the answer. They might be like, oh my God, I can't believe you're asking. Yeah. But let's be honest, philanthropy, just as every other sector, is killing Black women. So if this is going to be something and you might not make it out of, why not ask the question? Because if they're appalled that you've even asked, then you shouldn't be there. If they're appalled that you're asked, who are we centering? What does repair look like when harm is done? Because Teresa's right, it happens. Even at the best orgs, the best orgs say, you know what? We have this harm reduction plan, or like, this is what we do. Like, oh, you go to HR in this instance, you go to your supervisor in this instance, or, hey, we're working on that right now. If they haven't even thought about that there might be something wrong, that something might go wrong, you shouldn't be there. And I know that's coming from a privileged place, but I do think, again, people get into philanthropy thinking they're doing good. And people of color are willing to do more work thinking they are going to be doing good. So we have to ask the tough questions, because in all honesty, it is a tax shelter for a lot of people. And you're doing good. You're willing to be harmed and willing to be hurt because you think you're doing good for your community. And I just don't know that you always are. And if you are willing to work with an org or change an org, I want you to know exactly what you're getting yourself into, because there's nothing wrong with that. I worked at that org for 4 years and I told people, hey, they might say we're not diverse, but they're not saying we're racist. I can fix it before they say we're racist. And that was a decision I made knowing all the facts. So if you're in an interview, I want you to have all the facts.
Yeah. Thank you, Morgan. And I think those questions are important at the beginning when you're making a decision to enter, but they're also important periodically when we engage in a self-reflective process, right? To decide if we're still aligned and how much longer we want to continue to do the work. So thank you. And I'm looking at the clock. I know Julita is going to kill me, but I have to ask one last question. And then it is clear that we have to have a part 2 at some point, whether it's another webinar or a podcast, because folks have so many questions about practical advice for folks who are entering and folks who are starting their own foundations, and for our sisters and people who are not in senior roles in organization, how to navigate the inner workings, right, of foundation. And then like this question around impact and evaluation, right? Especially for Black women who think about the work in a de-siloed, more holistic way. How do we think about impact? How do we define it? How do we bring other people to understand impact differently? So that's part 2. Now, to end today, so I had to say that so that folks will come back when we organize part 2. But my last question today is, I've kind of borrowed it from a sister who asked me this question many years ago. And it was around like this notion of being an ancestor, right? And then another sister was like, I'm also thinking about what kind of descendant I am. And I've held on to those 2 questions for years now. And my last question to you is, as you think about your ancestors and as you think about future generations, what is your freedom and liberation dream? And that's where we'll end. As you think about your ancestors and you think about future generations, what is your freedom or liberation dream? And that will bring us home. Okay, don't make me call on one of you. Okay. I am going to start this round with Sister Charmaine.
I don't know why I thought you might do that.
Because we opened up with Teresa, who was the OG, and Morgan needs to catch her breath because she just like gave us so much in the last question as the last speaker. So by default, it's you, but you've got this.
Okay, all right. I got it. I will say that we as a people, as women of color notably, have found the balance between effort and ease that leads to joy.
Will you repeat that one more time, please?
That we have found the balance between effort and ease that leads to joy.
Mm. Mm. Thank you. Morgan?
Yeah, I heard two brilliant Black women say the other day that even resistance is centering whiteness.
Mm.
And I really would love what it would look like for us to not have to resist.
Mm.
And I think often about my children's children and what would it look like if they could just be and we could stop fighting. So I think of a liberation where we are together, where we are not afraid of healing or generative conflict, and there is nothing left to resist.
Mm.
Damn, the brilliance.
Thank you.
So amazing. You know, it's interesting because when I think of
No, did we lose Teresa?
when I think at the end of the, am I here?
Yes.
One of the things I think of is how can we create the ecosystems where we can swim and all swim in the water equally, that, you know, that feeling of being in the water without the resistance, but knowing that every part of it is helping us to become stronger, and that we're all part of an ecosystem that is feeding into another system, and that every single part, every single fish, every single sea anemone is has a significant value. And we all know that value going in. And I think of liberation as the ability for all to swim in the waters, go the direction they need to go with the value that they hold. And I think that's what I would say is these, you know, philanthropy is a different kind of field, different kind of water to swim in, should not be as hard as it has been for so many. It will continue to be hard as long as the sharks and the whales believe that they have more power than the baby fish in the water. And the baby fish in the water are those that are changing the ecosystems all around it. And they will change the water so that those big sharks or those big whales stop sucking up all of the water and all of the energy. And we will have liberation when we can all be swimming in the water with respect and love and joy.
Ooh. Thank you. That is so beautiful. And I received that. I hope we're all receiving that on the call. And I will add that part of my liberation dream is connected to your liberation dreams. I dream of a world where we are well practiced in dwelling in freedom, in joy, and in abundance. And I know that when we trust and support and uplift Black women in the world, we can all get free. And that was the intent of this conversation. So thank you for saying yes to it. And to everyone who joined us, I hope you were fed, and I hope you got a lot out of this. And I hope you leave feeling some form of ease. And stay tuned for part 2 in 2023. With that, my sisters, I thank you for coming. Thank you for being you in the world, exactly as you are. And I wish you and everyone on the call happy holidays, filled with abundance, joy, and freedom.
Thank y'all so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Take care of
everybody.
yourself.
Take care.